most famous wall in Roman Britain was not built to keep everyone out. Its darker truth is that Rome built a machine for making people visible, and by the end, those stones will look less like protection than control. The familiar version is simple. Rome marched north, reached the edge of its world, and raised Hadrian's Wall as a shield against danger beyond the frontier. On maps, it looks like a hard line. In schoolbook memory, it becomes the edge of civilization. Rome on one side, wilderness on the other. But the surviving evidence does not fit that picture. The wall ran for 73 miles, from the River Tyne in the east to the Solway Firth in the west. What remains today is mostly the stone core, stripped of the facing stones that later generations carried away for farms, churches, and roads. The original structure may have risen roughly 15 to 20 feet, with a walkway and a parapet high enough for soldiers to look out across the land, and high enough for others to see them looking. That matters, because a wall designed only for defense tries to be impossible. Hadrian's Wall was not impossible, it was organized. Every Roman mile there was a gateway. Between those gateways, every third of a mile, there was a turret. The rhythm was too regular to be accidental. Gate, watchpoint, repeated across the northern edge of Roman Britain until the landscape itself became a schedule. The first crack in the old story appears in those milecastles. The name sounds grand, almost medieval, but these were not castles in the way the word makes us imagine. They were small controlled crossings, practical and tight, where movement could be watched, delayed, approved, or refused. Picture one at first light. Cold stone, a gate still damp from the night air, a trader waiting with goods, a messenger with permission to pass, a local family moving under Roman eyes. The wall did not need to stop all movement. It only needed to turn movement into information. And that changes everything. Because if people crossed at known places, at known intervals, under known supervision, then the frontier was not a dead end. It was a filter. Rome did not simply divide the world. Rome counted it, inspected it, taxed it, questioned it, and trained everyone near the line to understand who was allowed to move freely and who was not. The stronger contradiction lies behind the wall. About 100 yards south, the vallum ran parallel to the stone structure, a massive earthwork of ditch and banks. It was not the dramatic obstacle most people picture when they imagine Roman defense. It faced inward as much as outward. It created a controlled military zone behind the frontier itself. That is the part the myth usually misses. Control did not begin with the people beyond the wall. It began with the people already inside Roman territory. The vallum tells us that even Romans, or those living under Roman rule, could not simply wander through the frontier system. Roads, forts, gates, supply yards, patrol routes, these were not public scenery. They were imperial infrastructure. To enter that space was to enter a machine, and machines have rules. Long before the wall rose, Rome had already been shaping this region. Campaigns under governors like Agricola pushed north in the late 1st century, and the Stanegate road fixed Roman power into the land before Hadrian formalized the line. Roads like that were not gentle paths following local habit. They were straight Roman decisions cut through uncertain terrain. The wall did not create the frontier. It froze an older military landscape into stone. The evidence at Corbridge makes that clearer. The site does not need to look spectacular now to have mattered then. Its foundations mark one of the most important points in the frontier system: a supply depot, an administrative center, a crossing point on the River Tyne. Imagine the stores that moved through it. Grain, weapons, tools, clothing, timber, leather, metal fittings, the unglamorous cargo of empire. No frontier survives on courage alone. It survives on warehouses, records, roads, carts, river crossings, and men whose names rarely enter history. If that hidden labor feels like the real engine of empire, type stone in the comments. The fracture widens at Vindolanda, just south of the wall. This was not simply a fort beside a boundary. It was a place where people lived before Hadrian's Wall and kept living long after the line was built. Its most famous evidence is not a sword or a helmet. It is writing. The Vindolanda tablets are thin wooden sheets preserved in waterlogged ground, carrying ink messages from the edge of empire. They speak in ordinary voices, invitations, requests for more beer, complaints about roads, small lines of human need, surviving where grand imperial speeches have vanished. This is where the old image of the frontier begins to collapse. The people here were not only soldiers staring into danger. Families were present. Traders worked nearby. Children grew up with the wall not as a symbol in a textbook, but as part of the horizon. A frontier lived with people becomes more complicated than a frontier built against enemies. The forts on the wall deepened that complication. Housesteads, one of the best preserved sites, housed around 800 men, an auxiliary infantry cohort likely drawn from what is now Belgium or the Netherlands. These were not simply Romans from Rome standing guard for Rome. They were provincials serving an empire that had recruited them, trained them, and placed them on someone else's edge. Inside the fort were barracks, granaries, a headquarters building, a hospital, and communal latrines. The layout followed the Roman grid: straight lines, defined spaces, repeated order. Even bodily routine had a place. Even sickness had a building. Even waste had a system. This was not the scenery of constant siege. It was occupation made permanent. At Chesters, the story moves faster. This was a cavalry fort, home to mounted troops able to patrol, respond, and show force beyond the fixed stone line. The fort sat by the river, where the wall crossed on a bridge. Rivers were not gaps in the system. They were points to be controlled. That is the collapse of the simplified version. Hadrian's wall was not remembered wrongly because the evidence was invisible. It was simplified because later storytelling preferred the clean picture. Empire here, barbarism there, stone between them. The distortion mechanism was not one secret cover-up. It was the force of popular legend, schoolbook compression, imperial nostalgia, and the convenient habit of turning complex borderlands into single lines on a map. A line is easy to teach. A working military, economic, social, and administrative zone is harder to fit into one sentence. Many people first meet Hadrian's Wall as a photograph, a broken ribbon of stone under a wide northern sky. The image is beautiful, lonely, almost peaceful. It invites the mind to imagine silence. But the past was not silent there. Boots hit stone walkways. Hooves struck wet ground near Chesters. Someone at Vindolanda worried about supplies. Someone at a milecastle decided who could pass. Someone in a turret looked out for hours and saw nothing, and that nothing was part of the job. The childhood version gives us a wall. The evidence gives us a world. And that world did not end at the northern face of the stone. On the other side were not empty lands waiting to be named by Rome. People lived there with their own structures, alliances, economies, and choices. Rome traded with them, negotiated with them, sometimes fought them, and often lived beside them in uneasy practicality. The strongest responsible interpretation is that the wall marked a Roman decision about management, not a final statement about civilization. It showed where Rome chose to concentrate routine power. It did not prove that life beyond it was chaos. It proved that Rome wanted movement near the frontier to happen under Roman eyes. Even the western and eastern ends support this. The wall met the Tyne in the east and the Solway Firth in the west, not because ambition suddenly disappeared, but because water could become part of the boundary. At Bonus, where the western fort has mostly eroded toward the sea, the frontier did not simply stop. Southward along the Cumbrian coast, smaller towers and fortlets continued the watch. Stone gave way to water. The system continued. Not far from the wall, tucked into a hillside, another kind of evidence survives. A Mithrium, a temple to Mithras, a god popular among soldiers. Its darkness matters. Above ground was the visible order of empire: walls, gates, barracks, patrols. Below ground, soldiers entered a different world of ritual, hierarchy, and belonging. This does not turn the story into theology. It turns it into human history. Men posted far from home needed more than pay and orders. They needed bonds. They needed meaning. They needed something to hold them together when the frontier was not glorious, not dramatic, not filled with battle, only cold, repetition, and waiting. And then Rome itself changed its mind. About 20 years after Hadrian's Wall was finished, Rome pushed north again and built the Antonine Wall across the narrower Fourth Clyde line. It was turf, not stone, and it lasted less than a generation before Rome pulled back. That retreat is one of the clearest clues in the whole story. The frontier was not sacred, it was strategic. Rome moved the line when it seemed useful and abandoned it when it did not. That makes Hadrian's Wall less like a monument to certainty and more like a surviving draft of imperial calculation. It was the line that endured not because it was eternal, but because it became workable. The soldiers who made it work were the final inversion. The wall is often treated as a Roman achievement, and it was. But the men who built, guarded, and maintained it were often auxiliaries from across the empire: Gaul, Germania, the Low Countries, Syria, North Africa. They served for 25 years, and if they survived, they could earn citizenship. The empire defended itself by making others invest their lives in it. Some stayed, some raised families, some became part of the very landscape they had been sent to control. The frontier was not only stone pressing against the north, it was a human bargain: service for status, obedience for belonging, endurance for a future. When Rome left Britain in the early 5th century, the system failed in the quietest way. The watch stopped. Gates lost their meaning. Forts emptied. The stone that once declared order became useful material. People quarried the wall into churches, farms, and roads. Empire did not vanish in a single dramatic fire. It was taken apart by hands that needed building stone. So the familiar image has turned inside out. Hadrian's Wall was not simply Rome's last defense against a terrifying beyond. It was a managed zone of movement, labor, surveillance, supply, ritual, negotiation, and compromise. Its power was not that it made crossing impossible. Its power was that it made crossing visible. The closing object is not the wall itself, but a gate in it, a narrow, controlled opening where the empire's real logic appears. Not in the height of the stone, but in the moment someone approached and had to be seen. Roman Britain does not end here. In the next dark timeline journey through this same frontier world, we follow the empire beyond the wall, toward the shorter-lived Antonine line and the northern gamble Rome could not hold. Subscribe and walk deeper into the ruins before the map changes again.